Hello and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music with me, your host, the 80s Mixtaper. Hope you all had a good week. Last time out, we kicked off our ascent into 1982 with the first half of Playlist 35. And we have the back six of that playlist today as we press on into late January. But first, as always, we love your corrections, recollections and general ramblings on this pod. And this week, we had a wonderful amount of attention on social media for a single from 1981. A song we last heard on episode 23, a boisterous beery stomp by Tempole Tudor in their Top of the Pops appearance. Of course, I'm talking about Swords of a Thousand Men. Naturally, with its call to arms, hoorah, 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 yeah, a lot of people focused on that. Over on Threads, lots of comments, too many to mention all of them, same on TikTok. Gravel Grinder said, saw them at West Runton Pavilion on this tour. They let me into rehearsals as I had the album cover painted on my rucksack. Still got the album signed by them all. Lambert and Son says, I once stood behind him at Waitrose on Holloway Road and remarked, do you know Mr. Tudor? That's not near enough shopping for 1,000 men. Mr. Stevens added, the brilliant Ed Tudor pole looking as though he's never taken anything at all, officer. He does look a bit wide-eyed in the video. St John Park says, great tune, the accompanying video is mad as a box of frogs. It is indeed. Didas Charlie says, I was 12 when this was on Top of the Pops and it blew me away and I bought the single the following Saturday. Elk 991183 says, my sister and I jumping up and down on our bed singing to this. She broke her bed, we never told our mum. Louise Donaldson 982, we have seen Eddie live. Brilliant show, just him, a guitar and an adoring audience. White Man Carl says the word bonkers somehow doesn't seem adequate enough. Brilliant stuff. Solstice Dreamer, I was 15 then, and honestly it was one of the best things to see on Top of the Pops. Although seeing all the New Romantics was excellent, as it was turning everything upside down. Mike Derangement Syndrome said my second ever gig after Adam and the Ants, magic. Ad Donovan said should be the national anthem. And my favourite comment of the week. This is from Lady Ekaterina. I was once walking through the local cycle pathway with my headphones, singing probably loudly to this here song. As I sang oorah, 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 yay, a lad sped past me on a bicycle, swigging a bottle of booze and belting out, over the hill with the swords of 1,000 men. And that, folks, is what this podcast is all about. What amazing memories and anecdotes you all have. And what a brilliant band. I saw Ed last year at Rewind South and he's still got it. Anyway, I digress. If you want to contact us with any similar musings and memories, I am on your socials as the 80s Mixtaper. That's Instagram, Threads, TikTok and YouTube. Or if you're old school like me, you can email in to completed80s@aol.com. That's completed80s@aol.com. Yes, I am old enough to like AOL accounts. So, what do we have in store today? Well, we start by unlocking a key childhood memory, courtesy of Tight Fit. Hall & Oates then drop one of their greatest songs of the decade. Theatre of Hate give us nightmares of robotic Yul Brynners. XTC drop what I think is their best song. OMD continue with Architecture and Morality. And we end with Bow Wow Wow's breakout moment. As usual, we can't play the songs on the pod due to copyright laws, but to counteract this, if you go into the episode description, you will find hyperlinked playlists for both Spotify and Apple Music, taking you directly to the songs, plus a full track listing so you can flip between the pod and the tunes. So without further ado, let's get back to the music. So we begin today by unlocking a key childhood memory for us all. There is a very specific kind of 1980s pop phenomenon that involves a group of people who look like they were assembled by a talent agency for a musical for a modern adaptation of Carry On Up the Jungle. They are tanned, they are symmetrical, and they are wearing safari gear and leopard skin outfits. And that's if they're not wearing the gorilla costume, and none of these things have ever seen a speck of actual dust. We're talking, of course, about Tight Fit. But before they were faces of the jungle, they were a concept. In 1981, record producer Ken Gold was watching the charts and noticed a trend, the medley. Something we've covered back in 1981, episode 26, talking about Gidea Park and the medley Beach Boy Gold. For Ken Gold, it was specifically the Dutch group Stars on 45, which was cleaning up by stitching together snippets of the 1960s. Gold decided he wanted in. He gathered a group of session singers, anonymous, hard-working vocalists whose names wouldn't appear on the sleeve, and he called them Tight Fit. And they recorded back to the 60s. It was a whirlwind tour of hits like Dancing in the Street and Satisfaction. It hit number 4 in the UK. But here's the thing, people wanted to see the band, so a group of actors and models was hired to mime on Top of the Pops. It was a success, but it was a transient one. By the time Back to the 60s Part 2 limped to number 33, the band seemed like a spent force. Then came Tim Freese Green. This is the man who would eventually become the silent partner in Talk Talk, helping Mark Hollis craft some of the most avant-garde, haunting music of the decade, and a band we'll definitely be hearing on this pod. But in late 1981, he was looking for a hit. He kept the session musician first philosophy and recorded a cover of a song that had already been around the world and back. That single was The Lion Sleeps Tonight. This is track 8, playlist 35. If you were a kid in the 80s, you will remember the performances and the campy Carry On-esque video, all polished dancers playing the part in a mock jungle. But the voice you hear on the record isn't the guy in the loincloth from the video. It's Roy Ward, the former drummer for the rock band City Boy. He's the one hitting those towering high notes. When the song exploded, Freese Green needed a new real group to represent it. He found Steve Grant, a dancer and model, and paired him with 2 singers, Denise Gingell, I think her name is, and Julie Harris. And so in late 1982, The Jungle arrived in the UK Top 40. In the video, Steve Grant is Tarzan. He's preening. He is surrounded by people in gorilla suits that look like they were rented from a shop that also sells over-the-hill birthday cards, novelty condoms and whoopee cushions. It is camp, it is bright, and it spent 3 weeks at number 1 in the UK. It was the 4th best-selling single of 1982. But the story of this song is not about a group of attractive British people in a studio. It is a story of a massive, decades-long oversight. The song began life in 1939 in Johannesburg as Mbube, written and recorded by Solomon Linda and his group The Evening Birds. Linda was a Zulu migrant worker who improvised that iconic melody in the only recording studio in sub-Saharan Africa at the time. He sold the rights to the record company owner Eric Gallo for 10 shillings, about $2 at the time. The song travelled. It was heard by Alan Lomax, who gave it to Pete Seeger. Seeger misheard the lyric Uyumbube as Wimwe, and it became a folk hit. Then in 1961, George David Weiss, Hugo Peretti and Luigi Creatori added the English lyrics about the jungle and the village. They gave it to the Tokens and it became a global standard. Through all of this, through the gold records and the royalties, Solomon Linda received almost nothing. He died in 1962 with the equivalent of about $25 in his bank account. His family couldn't even afford a headstone for his grave. By the time Tight Fit got to it in 1982, Solomon Linda was finally being listed as a co-writer, alongside names like Paul Campbell, a pseudonym used by Seeger's team, and the 1961 writers. But even then, the real money wasn't reaching his heirs. It took a 2000 Rolling Stone expose by Rian Mallon and a massive legal battle against Disney, who had used this song in The Lion King, before a settlement was reached in 2006. As for Tight Fit, the visual lineup of Grant, Gingell and Harris actually stayed together for one more hit, Fantasy Island. Freese Green, impressed that they could actually sing, let them record it themselves. But by 1983, the dream was over. The girls left, citing low pay, and the jungle went quiet once and for all. For track 9, we flip briefly backwards. It is 1981 and Daryl Hall is sitting in Electric Lady Studios in New York City after a long day of recording. The rest of the band has gone home, leaving just Daryl, John Oates and engineer Neil Kernan in the room. There is a small primitive drum machine nearby, a Roland CompuRhythm, and Daryl walks over and presses the button for a preset called Rock 1. He starts playing a bass line on a Korg organ, a simple repetitive groove that locks in perfectly with that mechanical click. He shouts to the control room, "Turn the tapes on," and then calls over John to play a specific guitar line he has in his head. This isn't a song they slaved over for weeks. This is a song that arrives like a lightning strike, captured on the spot as it's being thought of. They call it "I Can't Go For That," brackets, "No Can Do." Press play now. When we last checked in with Daryl Hall and John Oates, it was 1980, and they were celebrating Kiss on My List, hitting number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. But by the time they got to the sessions for their 1981 album Private Eyes, the pressure was mounting. They were becoming the biggest duo in the world, which meant everyone wanted a piece of them. Labels, managers, agents. They released one more song from the album Voices in 1981, "You Make My Dreams," and it does good business, reaching number 5 on the Hot 100 and eventually becoming the Toronto Maple Leafs goal song in the NHL for a time. Though amazingly, it never charted in the UK. The world hears "I Can't Go For That, No Can Do" and thinks it's about a relationship, maybe a lover being too demanding. But Daryl Hall and John Oates have been very clear. This song is a cry of defiance against the music industry. It's about being treated like a pawn and finally saying enough. The phrase "I can't go for that" was something Daryl had been saying a lot to the people trying to manipulate their creative vision. The recording itself was an exercise in space and minimalism. John Oates plugged his 1958 Stratocaster directly into the mixing board to get that clean, muted guitar sound. The lyrics were co-written the next day with Sarah Allen, Daryl's longtime collaborator and girlfriend, who helped refine the gibberish Daryl sang during the initial jam into a universal anthem of personal boundaries. The song became a massive crossover success, reaching number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on January the 30th, 1982. Crucially, it also hit number 1 on the R&B charts, then called the Hot Soul Singles chart, a rare achievement for a white act. It was the only record to top both of those charts simultaneously in all of 1982. It even knocked Olivia Newton-John's Physical off the top spot after her 10-week reign. But perhaps the most famous story about this song happened a few years later. During the recording of the charity single "We Are the World" in 1985, Michael Jackson walked up to Daryl Hall. He admitted that he had stolen the groove for "I Can't Go For That" for his own world-conquering hit "Billie Jean." Hall's response was gracious. He told Jackson that he didn't mind because they all lifted ideas from one another. The song's influence didn't stop there. It has been heavily sampled by hip-hop pioneers like De La Soul on Say No Go, and was the foundation for Simply Red's 2003 hit Sunrise. And if you watch The Mighty Boosh and the Naughties, you will also have nightmares of a chubby Bob Fossil in an overly tight-fitting baby blue safari suit dancing erotically to the song in his office before picking up the phone and matter-of-factly saying, "And that's why I can't go for that." It remains a masterclass in how to build a global hit out of a drum machine preset and a refusal to back down. Next up, we're once again stepping into the icy, jagged landscape of the post-punk era. We're talking about a song that feels like a spaghetti western directed by a drill sergeant. It's a song that features a saxophone that sounds like a siren and a drum beat that feels like a march towards a cliff. The band is Theatre of Hate. The song is Do You Believe in the Westworld? This is track 10, playlist 35. Before we get to the Westworld, we have to talk about Kirk Brandon. If post-punk had a frontline general, it was him. Brandon emerged from the ashes of the Pack, a punk outfit that fizzled out in 1979. He didn't want to just play 3 chords and spit at the front row anymore. He wanted something cinematic, something heavy with sturm and drang. In 1980, he formed Theatre of Hate. The lineup was a curated strike team. Stan Stammers on bass, Luke Rendell on drums, Steve Guthrie on guitar, and most crucially, John Boy Leonard on saxophone. That sax is the secret weapon. It doesn't play jazz, it plays anxiety. By 1981, they were a cult phenomenon in the UK. They weren't just a band, they were an aesthetic. Brandon had the bleached blonde quiff, the military surplus gear, and a vocal style that moved between a baritone growl and a haunting operatic falsetto. They released a string of singles that were successful in the indie market, like Legion and Rebel Without a Brain, produced by the legendary Mick Jones of The Clash. Jones saw in them a dark tribal energy that captured the paranoia of Cold War Britain. Do You Believe in the Westworld was the lead single from their debut and only studio album, Westworld, released in February 1982. It reached a moderately successful number 40 on the UK singles chart, their highest mainstream placement. The song itself is a masterpiece of tension, but its creation was a collision of high-level talent. Mick Jones returned to produce the album at Wessex Studios. Jones brought a Clash-esque sense of space to the recording, using dub-heavy reverb and echo to make the band sound like they were playing in a massive empty cathedral. The title is a direct reference to the 1973 Michael Crichton film Westworld, where a high-tech theme park full of androids malfunction, leading to a robotic Yul Brynner hunting humans. It's a great film, by the way, if you've never seen it, and I think there's been a TV programme since. But for Brandon, it wasn't about sci-fi. It was a metaphor for the Cold War. In interviews, Brandon has clarified that the Westworld represented the curated artificial reality of Western capitalism and the propaganda fed to the public during the nuclear standoff between the US and the USSR. The lyrics, focusing on a cowboy and a bear and a forgotten town burnt to dust with its residents nowhere to be seen. The track is defined by its tribalism. While other post-punk bands were moving towards synthesizers, Theatre of Hate stayed primal. The interplay between Stan Stammer's driving bass line and John Boy Leonard's sax creates a wall of sound that feels both ancient and futuristic. Music critic Simon Reynolds, in his definitive post-punk history Rip It Up and Start Again, noted that Theatre of Hate occupied a space of tribal gothic. He described Brandon's vision as one of militaristic proportions. Despite the success of the single and the Westworld album, which hit number 17 on the UK charts, the band couldn't sustain the momentum. Internal tensions and pressures of their rapid rise led to a split in 1983. Kirk Brandon would go on to form Spear of Destiny, taking some of that anthemic DNA with him, but never quite captured the specific brand of lightning again. Do You Believe in the Westworld remains an odd memory of the era. It even got on top of the pops. It's a song that managed to be catchy enough for the charts, but too terrifying for the top 40 to truly digest. For track 11, we're back with XTC and what is my favourite song of all of their sometimes quite quirky output. It's a song that attempts to quantify the human experience through a countdown of the senses, while simultaneously trying to survive the sheer, crushing weight of 1982. When we last checked in with XTC, it was 1981 and they were riding the wave of the album Black Sea. They just released Sergeant Rock Is Gonna Help Me, a catchy, slightly problematic bit of pop that gave them a top 20 hit, which we heard in episode 18.5. But XTC wasn't a band content to just stay in the barracks. Andy Partridge, the band's frantic, brilliant and increasingly fragile frontman, was moving away from the herky-jerky new wave energy of their debut and towards something pastoral acoustic and deeply, quintessentially British. This is Senses Working Overtime. Press play now. Senses Working Overtime is the pinnacle of this transition. It is a song about being overwhelmed by the world, not by its horrors, but by its sheer vibrating intensity. It is a song that sounds like a 12-string acoustic guitar being played by a man who is drinking far too much tea and perhaps starting to lose his grip on the concept of touring. To understand Senses working overtime, you have to understand Swindon. Specifically, you have to understand the Uffington White Horse, that prehistoric chalk figure carved into the hills near the band's home. Andy Partridge would look at these ancient landscapes and see something more permanent than the neon lights of the London music scene. It became the image on the English Settlement album. The song was the lead single from the double album, released in February 1982. It reached number 10 on the UK singles chart, making it the band's highest charting hit. It's a complex piece of architecture. It starts in 4/4 time, by the chorus famously shifting into a 5/4 count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as Partridge counts out the senses. It's a rhythmic trick that makes the listener feel exactly what the lyrics describe. A bit off balance, a bit overloaded. The recording of the track at the Manor Studio in Oxfordshire was an exercise in organic sound. Producer Hugh Padgham, who was simultaneously becoming the architect of the 80s big drum sound with Phil Collins, worked with the band to create a lush folk prog hybrid. Compared to the band's previous releases, English Settlement showcased a much more complex and intricate arrangements, lengthier songs, lyrics that covered broader social issues, and a wider range of music styles. In the book XTC Song Stories from 1998 and various interviews on Chalk Hills, Partridge describes the football-shaped lyric as a part of a playful, almost nonsensical lyrical flow rather than a literal symptom of vertigo. The line, "and all the world is football-shaped," is actually mirrored in the second chorus with, "and all the world is biscuit-shaped." Partridge has explained that these were meant to be childlike, innocent metaphors for the world being something just for me to kick in space or just for me to feed my face. Partridge has also explicitly stated that the core inspiration for the song's structure and its countdown was Manfred Mann's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in 1964. He wanted to create a reverse of that countdown that built up a sensory explosion. But there is a dark irony to this song. While Senses Working Overtime was climbing the charts and celebrating the joy of being alive, Andy Partridge was falling apart. The band was booked for a grueling world tour to support the album. In March 1982, shortly after the song peaked, Partridge suffered a massive mental breakdown on stage in Paris, followed by another collapse at the Hollywood Palladium. He'd been struggling with long-term dependency on Valium, prescribed to him since his teens, and the sudden cessation of the drug, combined with stage fright, ended XTC's career as a live touring act forever. They became a studio-only band from that moment on. This song, which is so full of life and joy, became the last great anthem that they would ever perform for a shouting crowd. It remains a masterpiece of pastoral pop. It's a song that tries to hold everything at once, the ancient hills, the modern radio, and the five senses, before the pressure of the world finally made the singer go quiet. For our penultimate track on playlist 35, we're talking about synthesizers, historical obsessions, and the moment a British synth-pop duo followed a hit single about a 15th century French martyr with another hit single about exactly the same 15th century French martyr. That song was the final release from their album Architecture and Morality, titled Maid of Orleans. This is OMD, and this is track 12, playlist 35. In 1981, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, Andy McCluskey and Paul Humphreys were in a strange position. They were the intellectual wing of the New Wave movement. They had already given us Enola Gay, a jaunty dance floor filler about the plane that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. This was their brand, high concept, slightly cold, yet undeniably melodic electronic music. We last checked in with them regarding Joan of Arc, back in episode 31, the second single from their third album, Architecture and Morality. That song was a top 5 hit in the UK, peaking at number 5 in late 1981. Most bands would move on to their next historical figure, if any, after such a success. But Andy McCluskey was far from finished. He had become captivated with the life of Joan of Arc, eventually writing a second song about her. In fact, this second song, the one we're talking about today, was actually written before the hit Joan of Arc, but it was initially shelved because the band felt its waltz time signature might not work on the album. During the recording sessions at the Manor Studio in Oxfordshire, they revisited the track. To avoid confusion with the previous single, the song was retitled from its album name Joan of Arc, Maid of Orleans to just Maid of Orleans for its release as a single in January 1982. The track is an atmospheric masterpiece. It is written in a 6/8 time signature and famously begins with nearly 40 seconds of jarring, almost choral noise. This intro wasn't just random static, it was crafted from a Korg MS-20 synthesizer and a Roland JP4 that was slowed down, sped up and pushed through an overdriven Helios mixing desk to create a sense of historical voices. If Joan of Arc was the pop song, Maid of Orleans is the requiem. The link between these two tracks is literal and dates back to a specific day, 30th of May 1981. Andy McCluskey wrote Maid of Orleans on this exact date because it was the 550th anniversary of Joan of Arc's death at the stake in Rouen. He later described the track as OMD's version of Mull of Kintyre, a folk-inspired anthem but rebuilt for the synthesizer age. The song is defined by its use of the mellotron, specifically the 3 violins and choral tapes. This instrument used actual magnetic tape loops to trigger sounds, giving the track a dusty, liturgical atmosphere that matched its medieval subject. While many fans assume the main melody is a bagpipe, it was actually created using electronic instruments to mimic a folk sound. The percussion was equally vital. Drummer Malcolm Holmes suggested replacing the original drum machine with real heavy military drumming recorded with massive reverb at the Manor, which McCluskey later credited with making the track come alive. Despite its experimental 40-second noise intro, Maid of Orleans was a massive success. It reached number 4 on the UK singles chart in February 1982. Even more impressively, it became a cultural phenomenon in Europe, topping the charts in multiple countries and finishing as the best-selling single in 1982 in Germany. The song remains the emotional peak of OMD's live performances, often highlighted by McCluskey's intense erratic dancing. It proved that synth pop could be deeply melancholic, historically literate and commercially dominant, all at once. We started this episode by going on a safari of sorts with Tight Fit, and we end today's episode by going wild in the country. When we last checked in with Bow Wow Wow, they were making history with C30, C60, C90 Go, the world's first ever cassette single. It was 1980, and Malcolm McLaren, the former Sex Pistols manager, had just finished poaching Adamant's entire band, Matthew Ashman, Dave Barbarossa and Lee Gorman, to back a then 13-year-old Annabella Lewin. But the industry wasn't happy. EMI had grown weary of McLaren's calculated provocations, leading to a split. By 1981, the band signed with RCA Records and released their first full-length album with a title that was less of a name and more of a manifesto. See Jungle, go join your gang, yeah, city all over, go ape crazy. This brings us to the single that finally snapped their chaotic energy into a top 10 hit. This is track 13, Go Wild in the Country, our final song on Playlist 35. Go Wild in the Country was released in January 1982. It reached number 7 on the UK singles chart, spending 13 weeks in the top 75. It was a departure in one key way. It was the first Bow Wow Wow single not produced by McLaren himself. Instead, production duties went to Brian Tench. The track is an ideological snapshot of McLaren's nostalgia of mud phase, a belief that modern post-industrial culture should look to primitive societies for its roots. The lyrics rail against the drudgery of urban life, polystyrene takeaway containers and lonely streets, offering a teenage fantasy of escaping to where the snakes in the grass are absolutely free. Musically, it's defined by Dave Barbarossa's Burundi-inspired drum beat, a style McLaren famously discovered via anthropological recordings of African drummers. Matthew Ashman's guitar flickers between rockabilly and surf, creating a frantic pop frame for Annabella Lewin's yelps and chants. However, the song's success was nearly derailed by its packaging. The single sleeve featured a photograph by Andy Earle recreating Edouard Manet's Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe with a nude 14-year-old Annabella. This led to a Scotland Yard investigation instigated by her mother alleging exploitation. The band was briefly prohibited from leaving the UK until McLaren promised to stop marketing her as a sex kitten. Despite the legal drama, the band pushed forward, making their Top of the Pops debut on the 11th of February 1982. Annabella performed with their now famous Mohican and ponytail combo haircut. At the time, they were touring as openers for heavyweight acts like The Pretenders, The Police and Queen, though they were dropped from the Queen tour after a poor reception from the fans. While Go Wild in the Country remains their best-selling single in the UK, it was soon overshadowed by their cover of I Want Candy, which became their definitive transatlantic hit, a song you can expect to hear on this pod in the future. So that was how we opened 1982, and what a start, but do join us next week for Playlist 36, where we slip into February. Adam Gervitz writes a classic, Haircut 100 give us Love Plus One, Soft Cell deliver the heartbreak of Say Hello, Wave Goodbye, and Tony Basil drops a song which will have us singing Hey Mickey, you're so fine, you blow my mind forever. If you'd enjoyed today's show and want to hear more, do remember to hit subscribe, and if you can leave us a review on the pod platform of your choosing, please, it all helps. But until next time, have a great week, and we'll see you then. Take care.